Welcome to the Real Estate Startup Podcast. My name is Benjamin Goodpasture. My co-host is Michaela Potterbaum. And I am excited to introduce our guest today, which is Todd Stromback, who is my good buddy and realtor. Today, we're talking about out-of-state real estate investing. We talk about the ups, the downs, the good, the bad, the ugly, the funny. And Todd just had so much wisdom that he went through, the ups and downs. He had like personal stuff he was dealing with, but he also had all this professional stuff happening at the same time. And so I think everyone's going to have something to learn and take away, especially for just estate investing, which I think a lot of people in like markets like California, New York, where you can't afford to buy real estate, you got to start going into the Midwest and the stuff. So, what were your takeaways, Michaela?
Yeah, no, I thought it was super inspiring just to hear his journey with it. Out of state is something that a lot of people hear about. They're maybe a little bit intimidated to dive into. And I think he was very real with us. He did not sugarcoat it. There's clearly several things that happened, including a house burning down. But it just shows like if you can just stick with it and ride that wave, like it's absolutely worth it. So yeah, I love this conversation and I think it's certainly worth listening to and yeah, let's check it out.
Todd, bud, thanks for being on the show today. So tell us about you. Tell us about you and how you got started in real estate.
So I grew up in Orange County, a little bit about me, right down the street from Disneyland. So saw the fireworks basically every night of my life, which was a cool place to grow up. I grew up surfing in Newport Beach, not a bad spot either. So I was pretty blessed. Went to college in Santa Barbara, also not bad. Went to Westmont, loved my time there. Studied history, which you mentioned earlier. I got some background in history and never used it in my career directly, but love it as a hobby. Got real into my spiritual life in college and found myself up here at Bethel in Redding in 2005. In my early 20s and thought I'd stay for like a year, maybe two, but decided to spend the rest of my life here. So I met my wife in school. I got to have a kind of a mentorship relationship with Chris Valentin, one of the pastors at Bethel.
Awesome.
Which was like a total dream come true for me. And kind of during the same time I started in real estate, kind of right when I moved here by accident, because I got put in a student house with like 8 other dudes in like a 4-bedroom house. And that became an interesting experience and opportunity to kind of dig in and get creative and see if we could find solutions on how to live well together with that many guys in a small house. And kind of, by accident got into real estate because the owner, he just took a liking to me. I think he just kind of trusted me for some reason. He liked something he saw in what I was doing because I was trying to make a really good living environment and experience for the guys there. So basically I became an informal property manager in that house when I first moved here for Bethel. So he said if I took care of the house, managed, everything, took care of all that stuff, he'd let me live there for free. So I was in. I was
nice.
stoked. So that's kind of how it started. And I kind of caught more and more vision, just kind of snowball effect as I went down the rabbit hole of real estate, started reading Kiyosaki, going to seminars, going to conferences, read everything I could of Kiyosaki. I really learned a ton from him. Obviously, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, which by the way, a lot of people don't know, but they should. Rich Dad, Poor Dad is a 3-part series. Rich Dad, Poor Dad, everybody reads is part 1. Part 2 is Cash Flow Quadrant, which is amazing. And part 3 is the most profound and crazy one called Rich Dad's Guide to Investing. So whoever's listening, if you haven't read all 3, but you love Rich Dad, Poor Dad, highly recommend all 3.
That's great.
Yeah. So then let's see. So I did that for a few years and we kind of created a great student housing model at that house that, as far as I know, we were the first ones to really do that, like at scale. And we got to the point where there was like a line of people that wanted to live in that house every year. And It was awesome because it was a win-win for everybody. Like the guys that lived there were happy because we created a really great environment and model for this. They were growing personally. through the stuff we were doing, really focusing on stewardship and faithfulness and excellence and all that stuff. The landlord was stoked because he was getting plenty of rent, that he was happy. And I was happy getting to live there for free and kind of explore ways to just make this a really awesome, thriving, situation for everybody. So
it's awesome.
It was a great greenhouse for me, kind of perfect to just kind of back my way into real estate, get some experience, start figuring out how property management works, understanding how investing really works, getting to know that landlord who's still a personal friend of mine. And then in 2010, I got married in 2009. In 2010, me and my wife took the leap and got our first investment property. It was the first property we looked at. It was 2010. The market was really low. Everyone was scared. We had access to some funds through an inheritance from my grandparents, actually, that we only could access it through purchasing real estate. They wouldn't let us have it any other way. So
God bless them.
Looking back, I thought that was pretty cool. What's that?
Yeah, that's amazing. God bless them for doing that.
I know, right? I probably would have wasted on something, something dumb if they hadn't done that. So that was pretty cool. We bought a duplex that was half off from when it was built and first sold in 2006. It had sold for $405 and we got it for $203.
Wow.
And it was only 4 years old and it was awesome. It had hardy plank siding, custom wood floors, really cool design. Not in a great location necessarily, but we found a nook that worked for us in this neighborhood, never had problems there, lived there for years, had both of our kids born in that house, had a great experience. So I was just on the phone with someone yesterday saying, hey, we just looked at our first house and we think it's the one. Are we stupid? I'm like, no, because I did that. And it was probably one of the best deals I ever did. I mean, that property was amazing for us. So if it's right, it's right, and for us, that was. I don't recommend that as a principle to buy the first house you look at, but sometimes if it's right, it's right.
Right.
So that's how we got into investing, was that duplex, and had a great experience. We rented out the one side to students, just like I had been doing for years at the other house that I managed. And then I started managing other properties for other friends and family, basically using that same model. So I could just pitch them on, this is what we did. This is how it's working. Here's the numbers. Here's, the projections. And then, eventually we had 85 leases I was managing. So it became a kind of a pretty big side hustle because I was working full time at the church at that time. But I felt like I had 2 full-time jobs. So that was a season for a few years that was a real hustle. I remember I was working, especially in the summers, I'd work 15-hour days constantly, all the time. I'd just go morning through night, go to sleep, morning through night. I set up a little office in the garage of our duplex. So I just had 3 fans or whatever, just blowing on me and my electronic, computer and stuff because it would get too hot. And it's it was a terrible, stressful time, but it was kind of cool to think back on that was just our season of the grind and the hustle. And in 2012, I got my real estate license to do sales. And at that point, I went full-time into real estate to do sales. So I had the management company on the side. I let go of my full-time position with Chris at Bethel. That became a part-time role that eventually we just phased out, and I went full-time into real estate. And it's been a great journey. I mean, I got to ride basically a wave that just went up for 10 years straight, from 2012 to 2022. Obviously now we've kind of plateaued a little bit, or we're in kind of a very strange market right now, but that was a fantastic ride. I was doing investing along the way, flipped homes. And to get, I guess, to the kind of point about out-of-state investing, Ben, if you want to go there, we could talk about my experience in Kansas City. But just as, I guess, a reference point, along the way, we bought a bunch of single-family homes in Kansas City, and that was a crazy adventure. I don't really regret it necessarily because I learned so much, and we did end up, thankfully, making a lot of money, but it looked real dicey there for a few years. I had houses burned down. I could tell you about the whole experience, but it was pretty wild. So I have one house left out of 9 that I owned out there. And I'm looking forward to trying to sell that in the next year, hopefully when the market, is probably going to get stronger. But yeah, I've kind of touched all aspects, I think, of real estate almost. I've done a number of awesome commercial deals, some of that with Ben, hospitality properties, boutique hotels, commercial buildings in downtown, management, flipping, renovations, single family homes, rentals. I don't know. I just feel like I've kind of at least touched, most of these spaces.
You're forgetting one, Todd. You're forgetting one.
Farm property. What am I forgetting?
Farm properties.
Including my own. Yeah. Yep. So I'm partial to the farm properties. So yeah, anyway, there's a little background for you on me.
That's amazing, Todd. Like, wow, you've experienced a lot in real estate, which is cool. And different cycles. You started during one of the hardest times, yet you bought your first property, a duplex, which could have been maybe your best investment because of how you bought it. So do you still own that property? You still own the duplex? How's that property? And then how did you transition into buying out of state in Kansas City?
Yeah, well, those are related actually. So it's a painful one for me because that property was really awesome and special. But we came up with the idea, my wife and I, in 2017 to kind of make a few plays that were all connected at the same time that involved selling that duplex. So basically the market had gained a lot of appreciation by 2017 from when we bought it in 2010. So we ended up selling it for a pretty good profit from where we got it. And we did a 1031 exchange and also used a portion of the funds as a down payment for our first home that we were buying for our personal residence. So that all worked out pretty well, but we bought 9 single family homes in Kansas City with the majority of the profit. And then we used some of it as a down payment for our personal residence and our first farm property.
Can you explain a little bit to us how that worked? Just because I've kind of been under the impression that in the realm of 1031 exchanges, you really need to keep things more in an investment space. But how did that pan out for you with putting that money towards your personal residence?
We had to definitely vet it all out through our 1031 specialist. And I think it worked. There's just ratios and different angles that have to be met for it to qualify. And it just did. We used enough of, I think, what was it? We took on more debt, I think, with the 9 houses we were buying than the debt we had from the house we were selling.
Okay.
And those were like for like property.
Sure.
So I think that's what just made it qualify. And then the rest he's like, I think we might've had to pay tax on what we used maybe. Okay. So I don't quite remember, but it was freed up to use for something else.
Yeah.
And we still were able to do the 1031. So it just all worked, which was phenomenal.
That's so cool. I love that you guys did that.
That's probably what happened is that you pay tax on what you use for your primary. But I think the big thing to really take out of this is that you sold 2 units and bought 10, just that you traded up. It's like you're playing Monopoly, you let 7 years go by, you let tenants essentially pay for your mortgage and you live there. When you lived in that duplex, was that covering your mortgage or how was that? What was
it was
your
almost
income?
covering the mortgage. It was almost covering the mortgage. Like all expenses included, we had to pay a little bit for it, but I think I'm not going to remember the numbers, but I think it was within like $100 or $200 of covering our payment, the rental.
That's awesome.
But wow. I also just remembered, I think we didn't even pay tax on the portion that we 1031 exchanged because we had lived there. I think we had lived there so much for the, 2 out of the 5 years or whatever.
Yeah.
You might not have had to pay taxes on those proceeds at all.
Oh, cool. That's an interesting idea. So why Kansas City? Like how did that come?
Yeah.
All the markets in the US, how did you decide Kansas City?
So I had been at a business conference in Miami and I met this guy that now, Branton Schreiner, great dude. And he was just part of our kind of group at that business conference. He knew people that I knew there and we got to talking and he just started sharing what he was doing in Kansas City. He had been investing for a lot of years with someone else out there. Well, I don't know how many years Branton had been part of this group, but he was in a group of people that had been doing this specific type of model to invest in property in Kansas City for, I think, like 10 plus years. And I just started grilling him because I had done so much property management and I'm thinking about, because these are inner city properties. These aren't like fun, like suburbs. These are interesting. I mean, if you can imagine it, at that time in 2017, you could get these little single family homes that weren't in terrible shape. Like some of them were really nice in beautiful neighborhoods. I mean, wide streets, parks everywhere, just green, big trees, beautiful neighborhoods. But the guys were just like, you just wouldn't walk around at night.
Yeah.
It's just, it's an interesting vibe out there. Like if you just drove through it in the day, you're like, this is gorgeous. This is amazing. And the house costs like $30,000 and you can get a loan on them.
What?
You can get a loan on them. So I'm just like doing the math and I'm just like, I can't believe the conversation. Like, this can't be real. But I started, finding out, talking to, lenders and stuff. I'm like, this is legit. I could pay, I put $8,000 like down, cash out of pocket, and own this rental where I'm paying like $200, $250 a month, all included. And I can get like $700 in rent. I'm like, dude, if I just scale that on paper, that's insane. Like it's 10 times what I'm, getting on my duplex. And they had a lot of controls so that things could stay stable in that environment. They bought only certain types of properties in certain areas with certain features like hardwood floors that you can stain with this black stuff that's like, very hardy. So they don't care if it gets scratched up because the next tenant, you stain it again with the same stuff. Like they had all these controls. And I just was like so impressed with this model they had that felt bulletproof. I'm just like,
wow,
crush it on cash flow. Yeah. I think it's going to be very stable. So I just kind of got sold on that whole plan with these guys after a few conversations and talked to my wife about it, got our wheels turning. We just thought about that idea of like, hey, let's sell the duplex, convert all that equity into way more cash flow here in Kansas City with these guys because they also will manage property and they'll do it in this way. It really makes sense to me. Cool. So that's how that started.
So did you ever go to Kansas City and did you look at these properties before you bought them or did you sight unseen?
The ones that I actually bought were sight unseen for me personally, but Branton was also a realtor. So he became my agent and my kind of the lead for like my boots on the ground team that we kind of built out, which he already kind of had that team. I just kind of inherited it through working with him. So I got to kind of get a lot of visual about these homes, but I didn't see them in person. I did make a visit out there. Let's see. I can't remember the timing of this. I did make one trip to Kansas City, I think before we had identified the homes for the exchange, just to vet out the area and make sure I liked how it felt. And the experience, like I said, was kind of unbelievable. Like, I can't believe these neighborhoods that are so beautiful like this, I can buy a house for $30,000. Like it
Seriously.
just blew my mind, So yeah, I saw the area and the neighborhoods that we were going to, look in person, but I didn't see in person the homes that we bought.
So did you buy all 9 houses for $30,000?
There was a variety of pricing between like, I got one for like 17,000. That was pretty rough.
What?
It's actually the one that I'm still holding on to right now. I did 100. I think that's true. I think that's what I got that
crazy.
One for. I think that we did a full reno on it in 2022. I don't have to get into that whole story, but we got caught in the market moving too fast for us to get our ARV or even close to it. So I put, I think around 65, 70 into it. And we did everything, new roof, new siding, like new windows. It's a small house, so like 1,000 square feet. But yeah, that thing was supposed to be worth 185 in 2022 at the height of the market. But I couldn't even sell it for like 160 because everything just froze up, like summer, fall 2022 when we were done. So I'm renting it now for, I think I get $1,300 a month. So it's pretty stable actually in that situation, but I'm looking forward to selling it. So pricing, I think on the low end was like 17. I believe that's true. That one was pretty dang rough. We had to do foundation work and stuff on it. Up to like 35 was probably the most I spent on, I think, a couple of those homes. And those ones were like, those were in good shape. Like they were basically turnkey.
Wow. I mean, still, it's a good investment. You're talking $17,000 to buy it. You put 65 into it and you're getting $1,300 a month. Yeah.
My payment's like, I think $700, $750. So it's still, it's doing pretty good.
That's awesome. That's super cool.
And it shouldn't need maintenance because we did like a full floor, electrical, everything.
That's the one nice thing about a full renovation. It's like, well, we should be good for a little bit on our main systems because I just replaced them all. But
100%. And I like really value that kind of peace of mind a lot more than I used to.
Yeah. Have either of you seen the show called Bargain Block? It's like these guys, they're basically buying houses in Detroit for like $5,000 or $6,000. And then they put like 80 or 90 into each of them. And they end up walking with like $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 per house profit. But it's really fascinating because it's kind of like these inner city parts of Detroit. It's just, I like watching it because it just shows me like a different part of the country. But I think there are still several pockets across the US, maybe not quite like Detroit and maybe not quite like, because I'm sure even that part of Kansas City, actually that'd be an interesting question. Is like, what are those houses going for now? The unflipped, unrenovated houses in that same neighborhood, like what would they be going for now?
I don't actually know the answer to that. I would think around 40 to 50, I would think.
It's still very low cost compared to the markets that we're all in. So
yeah, I think it's still relatively low in that way, but
yeah,
for reasons we can potentially get into, I mean, I don't think I would buy back into that same class of that market out there. I would be interested in like a B class property in the Kansas City area now, maybe even an A class, but I don't think I could do the C and D again out there without being there in person.
Yeah. I feel like, that's hard to not be there. If you're going to do, anything C and D. I just had a friend walk a property for me yesterday in Denver, and the wholesaler that was, offloading the contract was just like, we don't typically let people walk it without, an offer. And I was like, okay, well, I just need a friend to go look at it. And thankfully they let us walk through. I mean, I could have done an offer, but, she FaceTimed me from the house. First of all, she showed up thinking it was empty, and there's a family in there that does not speak English having a birthday party. And they're just
tenants or squatting?
I think they were tenants, but we don't know a whole lot because she genuinely had to use Google Translate. And she walked through and FaceTimed me. But I mean, the photos, from the listing versus what she walked through were two very different things. And so I was just so glad. I'm like, man, this is why it's so good to do a walkthrough, even if it's just your friend on FaceTime, somebody you trust, like with a camera and
100%.
And some eyes. But yeah. That's really cool that you went into that. Okay, so what was kind of like the hardest part of that? It sounds like there was some heartbreak involved in this. Was that just this kind of remaining house, or what were the hardest points about this whole thing?
Man.
Where to begin, right?
I know we want to keep people somewhat inspired, but we want it to be real too.
Yeah, no, I think we'll land it in a good spot, but I gotta dive down a little bit for a minute to answer the question.
No, it's good.
It's a full cycle experience, right? Real estate can be that way. It's just there's a full cycle of adventure in it. So selling that duplex, looking back, gives us some heartache because partly it just was a really special place for us, right? It was our first house. It was really cool. We had our children there, our first two kids. So we're almost just like sentimentally like, wish I wouldn't have let that go in that way. Like that place was so cool. We actually ended up selling it to a tenant of ours who was a great tenant. So we kind of still have a connection to it, which is nice. But that's part of the heartache is just in general, letting go of a property like that is just, it's hard. But there's more. There's more heartache. Don't worry. So we start the sale process with our duplex. Now we're in the 1031 exchange, which has, these pressures of timelines and identifying and closing and all this stuff. And we're starting to be in that mode. And I go out there to Kansas City to scope things out more on the ground. And the night that I get there, we go to a Kansas City Royals game, which was super fun. I really kind of got me back into liking baseball again since my childhood. So we had a blast, but I was informed after the game that the partnership of those guys that I was starting to join up with for the group, the partnership was dissolving. They had some kind of conflict and they were breaking up their partnership. So my whole plan that I was really feeling great about, because like Kiyosaki teaches this, or Ken McElroy, his property manager advisor, really leans into like only invest out of the area that you live if you have a great property management company and a great plan in place to do it. So I already had, I was already very nervous to do anything like that. Only reason I was comfortable in Kansas City was because of that group that I had really vetted out them and their system. So I thought, but I was informed that night that thing was falling apart. So The next day I had to really make a decision. Do I take the risk to still move forward into this? I'm already kind of halfway in this process. So do I continue, or do I pull out of selling the duplex, or do I sell it and just potentially pay, the taxes? So I made a decision consciously we kind of found a plan B. The biggest investor from that group that now didn't have a property management company either, he formed his own management company. He's a guy who I'm still connected to out there to this day. Amazing guy. He'd done crazy stuff out there, like flipping hospitals and things like that. He's a really interesting dude. And he's still like a mentor to me and a support in Kansas City. So he started his own management company, but that didn't end up working out. I closed on these 9 homes. We're kind of in it. That management situation also dissolved pretty quickly. So I kind of got into a survival situation with these 9 properties out there for about 3 or 4 years, where so that was 2017. I'm 7 years, I think, into that process right about now. And I've been through, I think, 7 property managers in that time. So a year. And not because I'm super picky. I knew exactly what, to ask them and what expectations should be. And just things happened. Companies sold, companies, right. Just things kept happening where I had to keep pivoting. So that's been hard I finally have a pretty good one that I've been with for a couple of years, and it feels stable and good. But that was one of the really hard things, was constantly having to deal with pivoting on the management.
And that's exhausting, Todd. That's really exhausting to have to go from one manager to the next and having to realign with expectations, communication. I mean, it's a lot.
And retraining, all of the different things that happen every time. Yeah.
100%. 100%. No, it really was. And we had bought a farm, the farm property bought at the same time, our first one. And my leg kind of tweaked out, my knee. So I couldn't really barely walk. So it was my whole life kind of became very survival oriented, where it's I got a farm now to manage that I can't take care of. I got these investments that are, hundreds of miles away that I need to figure out, solutions for, that are falling apart. Some of the dramatic stories out there were on Valentine's Day, I think 2018. So shortly after I bought these, I got news that one of my houses had burned down, and it was in the news. And the story was that a disgruntled boyfriend of my tenant threw a Molotov cocktail on her front porch and burned down the house. Yeah. So that was my introduction to oh my gosh, what have I gotten myself into out here? In this place, this is like Mad Max, It's
a movie.
Yeah.
It's a movie.
That's crazy.
What's ironic? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, what happened? I'm just that's crazy.
So they sent me the news clipping and everything. I'm just this felt so surreal, just because I'm already juggling a lot of other things in my life. So it's almost just this can't be real, So the ironic thing was, it ended up being one of my best deals ever, because I had insurance.
Yeah.
And I had found a contractor who was able to, they called it a complete loss from an insurance perspective.
Yeah.
But my contractor, who was very experienced in the area, very good with these types of homes, he found a way to preserve the bones of the home.
Wow.
So we didn't have to just start over from scratch. So I got a full payout as if it was a total loss. But in reality, we were able to get the property back into really good condition for much less than what my check was for from the insurance company. So very stressful. It's not a strategy I would, recommend, obviously, or want to try and do. But kind of one of the cool ways, I guess, I just go real estate has these ways to kind of work out sometimes. I don't know. It felt like a tragedy. And by the end, I was well, I just made a bunch of money for not that much work. It's pretty cool.
What were the numbers, Todd? Can you share how the numbers worked out?
I think that house, I probably bought it for around 20,000. It burned down, so to speak. I mean, the fire department had come in through the roof with their axes and stuff.
Oh
it
my
was
gosh.
it looked, I can see why they called it a complete loss. It just looked like it was trashed. I think I got a check for 80, I believe. And I think it cost me about 30 to get it back into a good place. And
30? How did he do that for 30 grand? That's amazing.
You made 50.
It was just like one step at a time. Like it was one of those things where he looked at it the first time and had one opinion and went back later. I guess the smoke did get into here, and we kind of just kept building into it until we had a full estimate. And then you press the equal sign. You're like, that's not that bad because I know a big fat check coming my way,
Oh my gosh.
The check might not have been 80. It might have been 60 or 70, but it was significantly more than the cost that it took to get it back into rent ready condition. And it wasn't like we were like skipping, corners really. It was just like the smoke damage wasn't as bad as we thought. We were able to get, X, Y, and Z, just got lucky and got taken care of without being a big issue, salvaged a bunch of the framing. And it's just like, hey, this is it. Just the numbers worked out.
And like a new house too. You got a renovated house.
Yeah. Well, it sounds also like you had a big part of that equation working out was your contractor. Sounds like he was a good person to have on the team for that moment.
He actually was one of the guys who was part of that initial group that dissolved. He was a contractor that had been investing in these homes for like 10 years out there in Kansas City. So that was a great connection because I think partly maybe I think a lot of people felt bad for me out there with how things went. It wasn't necessarily anyone's fault. I chose to take the risk, but it just got really crazy for a while. And so I think that kind of helped me because he was kind of on, in my corner, wanted to help me and, dug in with me to find a creative solution. So that was pretty cool.
And you sold that house, right?
Yep. I think we sold that one for like 60, something like that.
Yeah. Wow.
Because it's still like, I remember, I think it had a garage that was like falling over. So it had something going on with it that was still like kind of a pretty big blight on the property. So we still discounted it just because I was ready to move on and get out of it.
Sounds like you did well though.
Well, yeah, because I only owed on it. I only owed like $15,000 or something. So it still worked out great.
So cool.
Yeah.
So what else, Todd? What other crazy stories you have from Kansas City?
So some of them are pretty sad and ugly and dark. I don't know what this podcast audience is into, but some of it really is sad. I mean, we're talking inner city, we're talking rough lives and people surviving, right? So I have stories of literally prostitution houses that were mine that I didn't know that they were functioning that way.
Wow.
2 of them until someone did a walkthrough and took some pictures for me and I broke my heart. I mean, I couldn't, so I'm talking about all kinds of ages too. And it was, we worked really hard then to clear that house out, which was a huge hassle. They damaged the house when they left big time, owed me many thousands of dollars that I could never recoup. So we had a couple houses like that. We had drug houses. I think one of those had both in the same house. So we dealt with some stuff there. I had multiple houses vandalized while they were vacant. That's one of the things I learned about investing in that class of property, like in the inner city is they cannot sit vacant. Mm-mm. They just cannot sit vacant because I had all the copper stripped out of, I think, multiple of my properties where they just rip everything out of the walls, anything of value, all the wire, all the lines, thousands of dollars to fix it. So we had that happen. We had a murder happen next door to one of my properties.
Oh my gosh.
Thankfully, it wasn't on our property. I had a tree fall on a tenant's car that they were trying to sue me for, but they weren't able to do that. Let's see. I think that might be the bulk of it right there. But, over a few years, it was a lot.
That's crazy.
Literally, it was every month something crazy was happening out there with those 9 properties every month for about 3 years.
9 properties in inner city. I mean, that's a lot to deal with. I have one property right now that I flipped last year. It was really my first full flip that I did. And I bought it, and it's probably more of a, it's probably more of a C class neighborhood here in Nashville. And I didn't know it, but it was essentially next to a meth house. And so just kind of, even though that wasn't my property that was going through that, just being in that close proximity to that kind of activity is close enough for me to not necessarily want to buy a whole lot in those neighborhoods in the future if I can avoid it. And this house was a great investment, and I still have it, and it's working out fine. But it's just the things that have happened just from one house and not even a D class, It's thankfully all my tenants feel safe and we've been good. But I think it's just reminds me that the cheaper the house often comes with the location too. And so I think I've been thinking a lot more about ways to invest in just honestly more expensive locations
Mm.
so that you can make more money, but then you get a lot less headache. So I don't know, how has that played out for you, moving forward from that? Like, and I don't know, I'd be curious also to hear where you're at with like out of state investing, if you're just have absolute PTSD and never want to do it again, or if you have any part of you that, or yeah, like where are you at with all that?
Yeah, I would still explore it, right? The thing I'd be vetting out first is what is the system? What's the management company? What is their system? How does it work? How does the property manager actually make their money? Because most of those models don't work. They have to make their money by kind of jacking you as the landlord on repairs, usually to stay afloat. I like property management companies that manage mostly their own stuff. That's kind of why they created it. And then they also open it up to the public somewhat. I think that's a really good model that makes sense to me, that they're not going to be looking to get you on repairs and stuff like that, which is where they usually have to make a lot of their money. So I'd be vetting out the property management company system and people. And then if I found any location where I felt comfortable with that, I would totally explore out-of-state investing still. I'd just be a lot more careful than I was the first time.
Yeah.
I know a lot more things to look for now. Because part of it was, I was really advised that, hey, you can't buy these types of properties and do a bunch of inspections and like negotiate. Like they're just not going to want to talk to you. You just buy it. You kind of buy it. What did we do? Yeah, we bought them. I think I bought 2 of them cash. And then the other ones, I just moved really quick on them. It was like as fast as we could close the inspection period. You just you get it done. And that's how you get these deals, And looking back, I would have rather probably have bought 7 or 8 houses and gone through a full inspection process. And if they didn't want to sell to me because I'm looking at that, that'd probably just be like, okay, I got to look for more property because especially in an area like that, I think, I had sewer systems, multiple that exploded on me that I had to rebuild. And, of course, it's like in the middle of the night in winter or something horrible like that, where you got, emergency fees you're paying to the plumbers. And it's like all that stuff. That honestly, the plumbing is the main thing I would really inspect on those homes if I were to buy again in an area like that. So, yeah, I'd still be open. I don't currently have anything in any other states, but partly I just don't have enough connection to a team like that, a boots on the ground team where I'm comfortable.
Yeah.
And I haven't really tried I'm not even quite closed this chapter in Kansas City. I still have this one to sell. I do have an out of area investment that I'm really excited about. It's up in Mount Shasta. So, it's like an hour north of here. And it's a totally different deal. And I have almost no stress on that property. Occasionally a few things have popped up that have been stressful, but I think it's a partnership and it's a really good team we have in it. And that feels pretty good. And I think it's in Mount Shasta, so it's only an hour away. So if I need to go up there, if I feel uncomfortable with something, I can go visit it still, which is nice. So I like the idea of I think out of area is just one step of risk that I can really feel comfortable with if it's within an hour or 2 or 3 of where I live. Out of state, when it's you need a plane ride to get there, that's a whole nother level, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. One of the big things that I think about for you, Todd, is, man, you went through the learning curve. So it's you'd hate to throw in the towel after you've learned all that, because now from experience. So moving forward, I would just imagine that your narrative, your investing journey would be much different because what questions to ask. You understand that your property manager is the most important player on your team. Contractors is important. You've seen that play out. And so it's man, you've done all the work. You've gone through all the hard stuff. And now you kind of own that. And so it's almost kind of I would hate to see you not continue down that path, because I feel like it would be easier it would be downhill from here, right?
Right. No, 100%. I think probably I'm just trying to kind of finish out the chapter so I can just kind of regroup in my head on what I want to do next. And we did have that one investment opportunity in Mount Shasta that we took advantage of, and that's been fantastic. So yeah, I agree with you. I don't think I would go for the inner city if I could avoid it.
Yeah.
I think I would go for definitely something else and probably like a B or A class out of area. Because I still see the general concept of invest in the Midwest for cash flow and use the appreciation or whatever your gains, your cash flow, not the appreciation. Build up your cash flow to buy on the coasts if you can to get appreciation, cash out your appreciation and put back into the Midwest for cash flow.
Yeah.
I think those are pretty cool cycles that I'd like to kind of find myself back, in a place where I can do that. So I'm still a big believer in real estate investing. I am a little gun shy more or just more cautious of deals, but honestly, it's just kind of rebuilding capital too. Like we put a lot into lifestyle in the last few years with, our family and farms and property where we could have been saving that up for investment, which, Robert Kiyosaki would have advised me to do and then let that pay for our lifestyle more. But we just were in a bit of a hurry to enjoy life more as a family. So we kind of made that choice consciously to just enjoy life a little bit, and it's just going to take a little longer to rebuild, I think, to do more investing. But I'm definitely not out of the game, man. I'm looking forward to the next season. And this just real estate market we've been in for the last couple of years has just been different, right? I don't really know what strategy right now I would be approaching the market with. In 2017, it was pretty simple. Like these numbers just work, these basic fundamental numbers work. Now I think you need to kind of have more of a specific creative strategy or way you're doing it to make it more attractive. So we'll get back in there again in time.
Yeah, that's good. I think with Kansas City, you got Mount Shasta, but really anything you can invest anywhere, which is great. But I think one thing to touch on that you mentioned is that kind of like the Midwest is typically known for cash flow, which means every month, like your ratio for your mortgage payment, your expenses, and your rent is normally pretty good, right? Like your cash flow is really nice, but appreciation, so the value going up is much slower than areas like on the coast of California, Pacific Northwest, maybe the East Coast, certain pockets. So you get less of that. Do you think there's any areas that you've seen that maybe have both, where you get good cash flow and you also get good appreciation?
I think Redding was like that for a time.
Yeah.
I think Redding totally rode that wave. And I think we're kind of in an unknown spot now around here. I'm sure you guys saw that Redding was now listed as the number one growth in value market in the country, which was really weird this year.
Let's go Redding.
Way to go, guys.
So I think there was a window in Redding that was pretty epic that I think, we got to take part in. I'm not aware right now of any markets kind of like that, but I'm sure they're out there. Like I said, I haven't been really looking for it, but I would love to find out if you guys have any tips on that.
We've had a pretty similar, I think in a lot of ways, Redding and Nashville had a very similar run the last few years. So we just had so many people move here from California, not necessarily from, the Redding area, although we did have that too. But it's just been a lot of people coming from East and West Coast. And now here we are a few years post COVID, and some of them are like, actually, I think I want to go back. So they're going back to California. But as far as the, appreciation, we had a pretty good growth here as well, and cash flow as well. So, we've certainly seen it slow down, but it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. I'm seeing a lot more deals kind of come across my desk with the job that I have now, kind of seeing the backside of a lot of the investors in the area here. And it's interesting because I'm no longer just looking at my deals only. I'm seeing a lot of other people's deals. And it's really, and I'm sure, Todd, you can relate to that too, being an agent. It's like you kind of get this other side of the coin where you're like, okay, there's actually still some meat on the bones here somewhere. If you just kind of have to look for it, there's still a few unicorns out there. And, in our area, we have a few small towns that kind of are within an hour of Nashville that are still quite inexpensive to buy in. And there's a lot of upside for renting, and there's a lot of growth, with appreciation. So it's still, I think, at least in our region, there's definitely still opportunity, but not like it was for sure. But I personally started investing in 2022, really 2023, just last year was really kind of my go year. And I just dove in head first. And so, I don't know the years of the feast. I only know, how to underwrite, as best as I can, as carefully as possible because you just there's no margin for error, right? So I'm kind of like, for someone like me who just got started, and I'm kind of just have the belief that's like, I don't really know the seasons past of all that. I'm just, this is when I started. So I think that, I love hearing stories from, people like you and Benjamin who kind of were part of those glory days of old. It's like, remember we had all this, and I love that so much, but it's just not a part of my story. So I kind of am just one of those new investors that's just like, well, if it makes sense, it makes sense. I think in that regard, I'm not really afraid of the market because I'm kind of like, there are still deals out there. It's just, you got to be really careful about it and still just pray to the good Lord that things go up and not down, or at least not down at the speed that could really hurt you, for at least a season. It needs to, so.
Well, I think it's too soon to know. Like, we're still in the now. And I think, Michaela, maybe in like 5 years, you might be like, actually, we had it really good and things have appreciated a lot since then. But like you said, there's always deals in any market, I think.
Yeah. But
it is requiring a more savvy, more creative. It's not the same person who was, it was a fad a couple years ago. Like, everyone was wanting to be a real estate agent. Everyone was wanting to invest in real estate. Now that there's some challenge to it, it's kind of weeding out some of the competition, wouldn't you say?
Yeah. Yeah. For sure is here. I assume it is for you guys too. It's like, if you're not really in it to win it and really like stick to your guns, like, you probably should just get out because it's not really just like passed over to you like maybe how it was for some people a few years ago.
Are you focused on holding property or flipping, or what's kind of your strategy, Michaela?
Yeah, again, still kind of newer to the game, but I flipped. Well, I guess technically I buried a couple houses last year. So I bought them and renovated them. I did one here in Nashville. I did one in Panama City Beach, and kept one here as a midterm rental. I just now converted it to a short-term rental starting really this week. And then it did really well as a midterm, and I could have just kept rolling it like that. I guess close enough to downtown Nashville and appealing to nurses and corporate and kind of the mix there. But I really just wanted to try out short-term rental. So I'm kind of in this experimental phase with just seeing how it does. But then I bought a house in Florida and flipped that, and I have that running as an Airbnb, and it does pretty well as well. And then I kept that, and then bought a house last fall with a business partner, and we renovated that with the intention of just selling it. So that's actually under contract now. It's been a longer process. We have had to hold that one longer, but there's enough margin there that we should be fine. But yeah, I mean, so different strategies. I'm kind of trying out different things, and now working for a small private hard money lending company that primarily focuses on Nashville and Denver. But yeah, I mean, I think, there's deals in any market, right? You kind of have to go looking for it, and then also just being wise with it and learning from our mistakes. And I just think it's really cool to hear your story and hear that you're still in real estate, even though you had houses burned down and all the crazy stuff happened, because on the other side of that, it's worth the wait, it's worth the work. And I mean, maybe we're biased a little bit, but I think it's the best way to build wealth. So I love just learning from your stories and everything.
Okay. If you can succeed in 2023 and then this season, it's got to be easier from here for you. So that's very impressive. And I'm sure those properties you're holding, once interest rates drop, they're going to look even way better. And so, keep it up. That's amazing.
Thank you. Yeah, my rates they're pretty disgusting, but I'm like, hey, if it cash flows, we'll just hold on to it, because then we know when rates drop, the prices are going to go up, and I'm going to be glad I just worked through that pain.
And you'll be in control of it already, not competing to try to get deals that are moving up really fast in price.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. What were you going to say, Benjamin?
Well, I just wanted to ask you about your Florida investment, because, that's an out-of-state investment for you. And Just curious how that's going. Do you see yourself buying more property in that area? Is it, how much time are you spending on it, or is it pretty passive? What's that like for you?
Yeah. No, I mean, I self-manage both of these Airbnbs and I have everything as automated as I can get it, I think. Even the locks on the front doors are
smart locks.
Yeah, they get a text a few hours before they check in with their unique code, so I don't have to do that even. It's pretty cool what's out there now from the first days that I started with Airbnb a while back. So just because it's only a couple properties at the moment, I self-manage, and which allows me to keep a lot more of the profit. But yeah, I mean, Florida has been really interesting because I bought it just over a year ago, finished the project just about a year ago. And I mean, it's stabilized now. It's doing really well. I think, just like any beach or resort or kind of like tourist town, there's going to be lots of Airbnbs, but if you can be part of the group of Airbnbs that actually puts money and time into like a good design or just not making it look like the kitschy beach. So that was kind of my goal. It's like, I don't want this to be like the kitschy beach house that you see that's like, give me vitamin C, but it's SEA, that whole thing. So we just made it like a nice, clean, modern house that happens to be by the beach. And that's seems to have done really well because everything's brand new. And so, yeah, it's been good. I've kind of been able to build a crew out. I didn't know anybody like going into this. So it just took some time, but I have a great cleaning lady. I have a great maintenance guy. I have, boots on the ground there that can help as needed. And I think that's really helped because of that and how much time and effort it took me to build out that team just for one property. I don't really feel as motivated to just start in a new city. So I am pretty regularly looking at deals in this exact neighborhood, not even like the same town. I mean, we're talking the same neighborhood.
Same street.
Yeah, absolutely. The same street would be amazing. This particular pocket of neighborhood that I found, sort of accidentally stumbled into it, but it's like on the very west end of Panama City Beach. So it's right by the county line where like the prices just shoot up and it goes into the 30A stretch of white sandy beaches. So it's kind of right on the edge of where your property prices, go up. And so mine it's just in a great spot. And I didn't really know that even buying it until I really got down there and realized. So yeah, I'm like, I would totally do that again. I look regularly, but I haven't been able to find any deals that are like what I found because my house was the worst house on that whole block. It's the thing you want, but it was bad. It was bad. So yeah, but I was going to ask, I don't know, Todd, do you have a couple more minutes if I ask you one more question?
You bet. Yeah, I'm good.
Okay. This is kind of a departure from what we've been talking about. I kind of wanted to ask you, as someone who's been on staff at a church, and I don't know, what was your role?
I was just like Chris's assistant. So we traveled, managed his life, stuff like that.
Okay. So for people who are not familiar with Chris Valentin, just, very well-known speaker and author and teacher. And so, I mean, what a cool and crazy experience that had to have been working with Chris. Yeah. What would you say as someone who stepped out of that church/ministry role and went into real estate, what would you say are some, because I think we're going to have probably a fair amount of people that I know, at least from like my side of things here in Nashville, we probably have quite a few faith-based investors that have kind of come out of maybe a similar season. So what would you say are some things or a thing that you would say, this is something I learned transitioning out of ministry and into the workforce or into real estate? Is there anything there that you think you could kind of look back at and say, I wish I would have learned this sooner, or I'm just grateful for this?
Yeah, I feel like I have a lot I could say there. So I'm going to have to, for your guys' sake, I'll try to be brief. But I thought, part of what really attracted me to connect with Chris was that he was a businessman first before he was in ministry. So I was really just attracted to kind of like, it's similar to this question you're asking. How did these worlds relate to each other? How do they carry over? And what's the same? What's different? Being in Chris's world and kind of being part of what I would call, I mean, it's his ministry, but it is running a business to some extent. There's just a lot of practicality behind his whole, how his world is managed. So I picked up a ton of stuff in that season. I mean, it's a mix of like my experience with him / what we were learning in school and just the things I was picking up on in my own reading and learning Kiyosaki, all this stuff. But definitely my journey has been, it started, I hope I'm answering your question, but it started for me with the concept really of stewardship, which is, I think you could say, a spiritual concept to some extent, not super spiritual, but I learned that, largely at Bethel and from Chris, and I saw it played out, in his world in certain ways, faithfulness and stewardship. There's a teaching from Bill Johnson I heard in that same season called Leading from the Heart. That's a really old message most people haven't heard, where he talks about some of these things too, stewardship and excellence. And those were the things that drove me in the beginning, and not just in a religious way. What really helped me, because that never worked for me. Just like, hey, you should steward, you should be faithful for X, Y, and Z reason because you're a Christian. I just didn't work at all for me. What really worked for me was when it clicked in, those things have rewards attached to them. And so the idea that just caught for me between all the different teachings and all the different things I was in that time in my life was, if I do a great job with what's mine in this season, it will grow. If I steward my responsibilities, my kingdom, what I have influence over really well in this season, which back then I had nothing. I had my responsibilities were my job with Chris and my chore at the house, which was the bathroom, because it's the one no one else wanted. So I just decided, hey, I'm going to be the guy to be like, I'm not too proud to be the bathroom guy. And in fact, this is a true story. This is where it all started for me, was that is going to be the best bathroom ever in a student home.
Love it.
So I would be like, I'm going to do an amazing job. So you could eat off the floor in that bathroom. It was fully stocked with like great toilet paper, overstocked. It smelled good. I mean, it was like, I just like obsessed on, this is all I have in my life kind of to steward right now. So if I do a great job with this, my world is going to grow in these ways. So excellent stewardship was like, that's where it all started for me. And my whole business life felt like it just kind of grew from there little by little, which is another kingdom concept, that I learned from Bethel, of when they took the promised land, God gave it to them little by little, because if you tried to give them too much all at once, they couldn't manage it well. The wild beasts that would come in and destroy the vineyards and destroy the land. And so I think there is like a kingdom model to grow in these practical ways in the world that comes from a spiritual place. I think oftentimes it gets very confused and made to be very religious, and that I think that really takes the wind out of it for most people. I think when those things can be attached, what I would call a kingdom vision, not a church or a religious vision of this, where it's a win-win and there's reward attached to what you're doing, I think it becomes a very compelling vision for people. And that was my experiment, was like getting really extreme to try to see if that would work. And literally looking back now, 20 years later in my life and going like, oh my gosh, it worked. Like everything grew from that place. And I've always just been trying to stay in that same place of like, well, my world's a lot bigger now, but it's still the same thing. Like little by little, it's grown to this bigger thing, but I still just want to work on stewarding this as well as I can, because there's things I still want more. Anyway, does that kind of translate?
I think it's great. I just want to have more conversations about this in general. I mean, I think Reading and Nashville have a lot in common in the sense that there's a lot of ministry-minded business people that are doing really cool things. But I think there's so many stories that are like yourself. I just want to learn from people like you that have transitioned into where you are from that space out of the church. And it's cool to hear your experience with it. So thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. Can I say one more thing about that and then I'll stop?
Yeah.
This was huge in my journey for this. I really was getting a lot of life out of, like I was saying, Robert Kiyosaki type teachings. What I would call, you could categorize that whole thing as personal development.
Yeah.
I don't know what his faith is exactly. I know he believes in God, but he doesn't identify as like a typical Christian. But I was getting a lot of life. I was realizing I like in that season of growing my practical world by personal development content. So whether it was Kiyosaki or Jim Rohn, who's probably my favorite guy in that space. Some people, Christians like Dave Ramsey, he has a lot of this type of content. But I couldn't really reconcile, like the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. That book specifically was highlighted to me in that season. And I felt kind of unsure about like reading it and liking it that much. So I'm like, I know he is a Mormon, which some people would still describe as Christian, but for my upbringing, it's kind of a different space. And I'm like, can I like this? And can I apply these principles to my life and expect it to still be good and healthy and work? So the breakthrough for me, like I had a lot of pent up energy and like, I wish I could just feel free to go dive into this personal development world because I feel so much life from it. But I'm kind of like, I'm not sure. Is that just the world? Or I had all these kind of reservations about it. The breakthrough for me in that was a message that Chris shared. I was with him at a conference in Santa Barbara. We had brought him there to do a ministry event. And he actually has this message for sale online still. Highly, highly recommend it. It's called Living in Wholeness. And what he taught in that message, I was there the first time he taught it live to my awareness. And it just changed my life because he talks about how he said that verse from 1 John, I think it's 1 John or 3 John, that says, "Beloved, I desire above all things that you would prosper and be in good health, even as your soul prospers." You guys heard that verse before? It's kind of in some circles, it's a really well-known, verse in the Bible. But I never heard this point. He said, prosperity is directly related to the soul, not the spirit.
Wow.
And through the context of that message, what I realized was what I'm doing in personal development is development of the soul. Development of the spirit, and this could be a whole long thing to really unpack it, but to me, that's like spiritual gifts, things that are more eternal. But the soul is like this thing where if you develop a strong soul in the world, that's what actually creates prosperity in the world, in your practical life. And as soon as I was able to connect that from like a kingdom perspective, man, it just lit me up. So I'm like, I felt total permission to go find this personal development stuff and just double down on it. And I feel like that's one thing that I've seen a lot of Christian business people totally not understand. They get very confused at like, I've been praying, I've been believing, I've been doing X, Y, and Z spiritual things towards my business, and it's just not working. And sometimes you get around those businesses and how they think about business. You're like, dude, you're not doing the basic things that create success in business.
Right.
They easily get very overly spiritual and they totally neglect the soul. And to me now, that paradigm just makes so much sense of that whole space of like, I almost feel bad for them because I'm like, I bet that's very confusing because you are trying really hard from a spiritual standpoint to have success in your life. And you're probably really confused and thinking this is spiritual warfare or whatever, that nothing's working, but it's the soul that leads to prosperity and a really good life here on earth, not the spirit.
Thanks.
Well, I think
so
it's also
interesting.
saying you're getting in your own way. I feel like the people that aren't in the Christian circles get that. They're investing in themselves, right? That personal development, investing in
100%.
yourself. You hear like Alex Hormozy, some of these people are Ryan Pineda that's saying, if you got $20,000, invest in yourself. Don't go invest in real estate, invest in yourself, because oftentimes people are like, I've got a money problem or whatever. And it's like, actually, you don't have a money problem because you don't have money. You have a knowledge problem and you have a connection problem. You don't know how to connect with the right people with money, and you don't know how to find really good deals, and good deals attract money. And that's all that soul, personal, like knowledge thing that you say, maybe like in the Christian circles, they're using that as an excuse, or they don't know that that's what's keeping them from greater things.
Yeah.
I think that's totally true. And I started talking to a lot of people about this and just observing from this new paradigm. And the dots just started getting connected and so clear. Like, for example, one of the most profound things I remembered was hearing Dave Ramsey tell his story. I don't know what message I was listening to from him, but he shared how when he was, man, I could cry thinking about this. It's so powerful to me. When he was 13 years old, his dad sent him to a personal development conference. His first one, I think it was a Jim Rohn personal development conference.
Wow.
And he started going to those like every year since he was like, I think 13 years old. So again, to me, I was like, it wasn't his amazing spiritual life, in my opinion, that created, because by the time he was like, I think 20, he was like, a multimillionaire or something like that, like with his real estate empire. But it was actually his soul was getting developed. He had a Christian perspective. He's bringing that to his life too. But that's not the part that I think was creating all that success in his life. I think it was that he probably didn't realize it. I don't know if he did, but I think it was that soul development that he was doing. And I think a lot of Christians walk around with very strong spirit. Like if you could see their spirit in a picture, it's like rippling muscles, and their soul is like completely neglected. They don't even know that there's no strength there. There's no principles they're really developing and living by. There's no, I'm working on my communication skills. I'm working on my negotiation skills. That's all like, that's a worldly thing more, I think, in a lot of Christians' perspective. They're like, I'm just going to pray and believe, and God is going to like do all this stuff. And it's like, I don't typically see it work out like that.
Right.
And I feel really bad for those people. And I was close to being one if I hadn't kind of caught this new vision and felt permission to develop my soul. And I just know that it felt profound when I saw that all those years ago. And definitely it feels like that thing worked out in my life. Not perfectly. I got problems I'm dealing with, but the trajectory of where my life went in a practical way in business and, wealth and investing, it seemed like that really worked, those principles and that connection to it really worked. So anyway, and in terms of business, ministry, I really come to believe that the soul should be the focus in terms of growing in that space. Not to neglect your spiritual life, of course, but that's not what's going to create the prosperity, in my opinion, in that space.
That's so good. I know I'm like, we should probably do a part 2 because I feel like we just tapped into something really awesome.
Fully. I was thinking the same thing. I was thinking that we should have like 2 podcasts in this round because the second half is like so good. Yeah. I think this is it's kind of, I don't know, it's hitting me in a way that's just like, I think we need to have more of these conversations because in general, we need them. But the 2 cities that we're most connected to in this podcast are 2 cities full of incredible Christians who are doing amazing things, but don't always have permission to move in that space of prosperity and wealth and legacy because they don't always know that that's part of the kingdom. And so 100%. I think if we can get to a place where we can empower people and I don't know, I think we can try to link probably both of those sermons from Bill and Chris, maybe in our show notes, just because I think it would be so powerful to listen to those. And I mean, that whole season for me was very formative when I was out there for just a year, sitting under both of their teachings and just seeing the kind of blessing, even just physically the blessing of wealth that was beginning to pour into Redding, and just kind of being like, wow, I think it all goes together. I don't think it's meant to be separate. And so I love this topic and I love hearing your perspective on it. And I think you're right. I think just even the word soul is kind of like an anti-culture word in a way, because we're so taught to focus on the spirit. And so I think you nailed it in that way, which is like, even the word is like, is it even okay to focus on that? But
100%.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Awesome.
Scandal. Sorry.
Yeah.
No, I was just going to share just kind of like a quick personal experience there too. And I think about when things took off for me in real estate, it was in the season of when I moved to Tahoe, and I was doing manual labor, like sanding trim every day on these $6 million homes. And all I was doing was listening to podcasts and audiobooks. That's when I went through all of the Kiyosaki books. I went through the Rich Dad Poor Dad, the Cash Flow Quadrant, and then that investor one that you talked about that's like super high level. I really like the Cash Flow Quadrant one. But anyways, listen to all this stuff, just literally just digesting just like wisdom and knowledge. And within a month or so, I bought 3 properties. It was like it was the most progress that I've seen in real estate, in a short period of time. It's like I went to another level of, I bought those 2 in Kansas City with zero money down, leveraging a partner. And then the next month you helped me buy Luke's house, another primary house hack with owner finance. And that was the first time I did that deal. So it was just, I think there's no coincidence with that. And then fast forwarding, there was the next season where I did the personal mastery class, the Climber. And like one of my main goals of that was to sell Shasta Rock Club. That was my intention. So you create this intention and you try to go for it. And, shortly after that, I sold the rock climbing gym. And so there's been these connections with personal development and breakthroughs for me. And I've seen, I'm like, man, or like jumping into a mastermind. And, this is just a great reminder for me. And I hope whoever's listening to continue that process. Like we haven't arrived. I'm like, whoa, like I want to sign up for something. I want to learn something because, the people that are like the wealthiest, the people that have been really successful, it's all because of what they believe. It's that Think and Grow Rich, that book of like, if you can think it, you can have it, you can receive it, you can build it and dream it. So thanks, Todd. I really appreciate you kind of like diving into this and like that great question, Michaela. I mean, I want to dive in deeper to this.